Good afternoon and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland and this week's Full Scottish. My name is Isla. On the programme this week, we are delighted to be joined by Jack Middleton, the newly elected SNP MSP for Aberdeen Central. Good afternoon, Jack. Oh dear. And we are also delighted to welcome Hugh Marshall from Talking Wales. Good afternoon, Hugh.
Good afternoon, Canada.
Start we will begin with. There were accusations that both Russia and Ukraine had violated a 3-day ceasefire, but no major strikes were reported. Russian drones killed 2 people, civilians, and wounded 3 in Ukraine's central, eastern, Zaporizhzhia, and Dnipropetrovsk regions, local authorities said. In Russia's western Belgorod region, 3 people were wounded by Ukrainian drone strikes, says the governor, Vladislav Gladkov. No attacks were recorded on Russia's diminished Victory Day parade on Red Square. Vladimir Putin has said he thinks the Ukraine war is winding down, remarks that came a few hours after he had vowed to defeat Ukraine at Moscow's most scaled-back Victory Day parade in years. I think the matter is coming to an end, Putin told reporters of the Russia-Ukraine war, Europe's deadliest conflict since the Second World War. Putin said he would be willing to negotiate new security arrangements for Europe and that his preferred negotiating partner would be Germany's former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, a close friend and ally of Putin who has history of business ties to Russia. In 2022, after the war broke out, Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, called Schröder disgusting for meeting with Putin and speaking in his favor. On Saturday, Moscow was blanketed in heavy security with internet services switched off across the city after a week in which Ukraine continued to battle the Kremlin with long-range drone and missile strikes, forcing organizers to strip the Victory Day parade of its usual pageantry. Customary display of missiles and armored vehicles, a fixture since 2017, was absent entirely. The audience included only a small delegation of foreign leaders from Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, who watched as a column of North Korean soldiers also marched across the square. So there was clearly some inconsistent wording from Vladimir Putin there, saying that the war was coming to an end and that he was going to defeat Ukraine. So, Hugh, what do you make of this inconsistent wording, and what do you think is actually going on?
Yeah, it was very interesting, the fact that they didn't have the military display that they normally had. They had to play a video because basically they haven't got much sort of military left by the looks of it. I think it is interesting. I think what happened in Hungary with the election there a couple of weeks back, and the fact that money is now going through to Ukraine, and it's quite remarkable, really, that Ukraine have developed an expertise in manufacturing not just drones but also the automated sort of systems, that the mobile weapon systems, because it appears that the front lines now are being manned sort of virtually from a distance, which means that they're losing far fewer troops, whereas Russia are still losing a large number of troops, and they know this to be the case because they're using drones and they can see on the video cameras the soldiers that are being attacked. So a bit gruesome, but I think it's the underestimation from the very beginning. When Putin told, I think it was Macron the day before, that he had no intention of invading Ukraine, and then the next day he tried to roll in his tanks from the north, and quickly things became unstuck. I think it is going to be interesting. I think the fact that Trump is in trouble with the Iranian situation. I think there's lots of things now that are playing against Putin, and hopefully, I think the fact that the USA now are seen as a bit of a pariah, and it's helping to sort of bond, the European countries, and the other sort of like Canada, Australia, to come together to collaborate. So it's odd, from Trump's madness, there's actually some good has come of it.
Thank you, Hugh. Now, with our Middle Eastern update, 851 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the start of the October 2025 ceasefire, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in Gaza since October 7, 2023 to 72,737. Despite Trump's claims that Iran is ready to make a deal, the deadlock on the world economy over the closure of the Strait of Hormuz continues. An Israeli settler accused of attacking a French Catholic nun is to stand trial in Jerusalem, a rare occasion when Israeli settler violence is being held to account. So this was a rather unusual case. So this settler has allegedly attacked this Catholic nun. So then how come this case is being brought to courts as opposed to other violence? And it seems that the anti-Christian rhetoric is on the rise in Israel. Why do you think that is?
I don't know, but it's strange because obviously, we had this case. We had the case of the Palestinian soldier who smashed a statue of the Virgin Mary, and I think there's been another case of an IDS soldier damaging, some sort of Christian icons. But it's strange, isn't it, that Israel murders thousands of Palestinian children, and when a couple of soldiers sort of smash up things and attack an individual, it becomes an issue because obviously I think a lot of it is to do with the Christian fundamental right in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I think who are behind Trump. So it's I don't know. It is not interesting. It is disturbing. But I think basically the sort of the Zionist, the Israeli sort of government and the ideology of that is to attack everyone basically, apart from themselves. So it's it is worrying. And obviously, the actions of the Israeli government is helping to, fan the flames of anti-Semitism in this country, where Jews are being targeted totally unfairly, because obviously the vast majority of them don't support what the Israeli government are doing in Israel. It's a disturbing sort of case, and the sooner we can sort out, Iran and the better. Obviously, the sooner we can get rid of Trump, because at the moment, Trump is keeping Israel and funding them so we can carry on.
Thank you, Hugh. Now, Jack, good to see you back there. And so, what do you make of this potential rise in anti-Christian rhetoric in Israel, and how that is being held to account as opposed to other crimes in Israel and the Palestine area?
Thanks for having me on. Sorry, I had technical problems. I'm just coming into this now. Look, the situation in Gaza is heartbreaking. I think there's been talk of ceasefire, but that's being broken on a daily basis by Israel. Innocent Palestinians are still being murdered and targeted by a genocidal leader, Benjamin Netanyahu. I think the international community has to stand up against that, and I would support any steps that the Scottish Government can take to stand up against Israel and show that the people of Scotland stand against genocide. They stand against the murder of innocent civilians, women, kids, and whatever we can do to stand up and show that Scotland is against that and stands against Benjamin Netanyahu is something that I would support.
Mm-hmm. And so, with Trump saying that he is ready to make a deal, but the Strait of Hormuz still being closed, do you see an end to the war in Iran as ending soon, or do you think it could continue for quite some time?
Well, I think what's clear to me is that Scotland is feeling the effects, the shockwaves of an illegal war that's been carried out by by Donald Trump, that he was goaded into by his chum, Benjamin Netanyahu. And what we need to do in the short term, however long this illegal war will continue and rumble on for, we need to be looking at strengthening our own energy security. I think this is demonstrated that Scotland is at the will and the peril of these global shocks because we aren't in charge of our own energy resources. So spikes in the price of gas. Vladimir Putin is the guy who's lining his pockets just now because of the spikes in gas sales. We're far too reliant on the Middle East, especially. We should be using our own resources, provided that they suit climate compatibility checks, to strengthen our own energy resources. And I don't know if we were talking about Ukraine before I joined, but that's one of the biggest things that we can do to support our allies in Ukraine by strengthening our own energy security, so Scotland can be as self-reliant as possible in terms of energy and not at the kind of the peril of these global shocks caused by Donald Trump, who's frankly carried out some horrific war crimes in Iran.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jack. And Hugh, do you see the conflict in Iran ending soon, or could it potentially keep going for a while?
No, I think it's going to go on for a while. Sort of Trump went in without a plan. I think this US exceptionalism. It doesn't help that they've got a Secretary of Defense or Secretary for War, as he sort of describes himself, who is, appears to be a maniac. Who sort of thinks that the US military is, sort of undefeatable. Just as Ukraine showed Russia that, that they were no pushovers, Iran have showed that they're capable of not just of defending themselves, but basically being able to continue things. Because remember, prior to this, the Strait of Hormuz, there was no issues with shipping going anywhere else. The issue in the Strait of Hormuz now is going to be something that's going to be permanent. There's going to be an issue there because Iran knows they've got a huge lever now that they can use to cause damage. And as you're just saying, people in Wales and Scotland are being sort of hit with additional bills for their heating, but also for petrol and diesel. And energy prices are higher in Wales and Scotland than they are in large parts of England. Even we're generating more energy in our countries that we actually use.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now moving on to our Hungarian update. On Saturday, pro-European Peter Magyar was sworn in as Prime Minister of Hungary, marking the official end to Viktor Orban's 16 years in power. Tizia's incoming foreign minister, Anita Orban, said it was not a coincidence that Saturday's swearing-in took place on Europe Day. So, with this new leader replacing Viktor Orban, Jack, what do you think? How do you think this will impact Hungary and its place on the world stage?
So I think it's a moment that shows that there's a political shift in Europe after 16 years of Orban. I think it would be 16. I think it sends a message that pro-European politics, like those pushed by the SNP and Plaid in Wales and democratic renewal, are still powerful forces across the continent and across Europe. I think Scotland's going to be a beneficiary of a strong and cooperative Europe that's built on the foundations of democracy and moving away from Orban. But yeah, I think it's a major shift in Europe after 16 years of Orban, and it shows that pro-European politics are still at large here.
Mm-hmm. And Hugh, what do you think of this change in Hungarian politics?
Yeah, I think as you say, it is a big shift. There were obviously concerns because Magyar was part of Orban's team at one point, so there were concerns that was going to be some of maintaining the status quo. But it's clear, the people of Hungary have spoken, and he's delivering on that. And the fact that he during the swearing-in ceremony, basically telling the president that he needs to go as well, because obviously he was a pro Orbanite. So yeah, no, it's good news. And as I say, we've got the SNP in Scotland as the largest party. We've got Plaid Cymru now, hooray, as the largest party in Wales. And I think the message around sort of being independent within the European Union is something that didn't play a huge part, but it is something that resonates with people, especially younger people.
And what about England in the council elections on the 7th of May as well? Reform UK gained over 1,400 seats, so there was a shift towards the far right in England in that case. So how does that reflect on the rest of the UK with this potential position in the far right?
Can I take that
Yeah,
on?
yeah. Sorry, yes, Jack.
So I think, Labour are an absolute mess. They're tearing themselves apart. They've been completely focused on themselves. They've not been focused on working class people who are struggling in a cost of living crisis. They frankly, I don't think have lifted a finger for working class people during a cost of living crisis. So people are annoyed. I think people don't think that politics at large works and delivers for them. But look at the wins for the SNP in Scotland, for Plaid in Wales. They aren't kind of bowing down and on this to Nigel Farage's will, like Labour and Keir Starmer are. They're standing up for what they believe in. They're standing against this kind of right wing strongman politics that Nigel Farage is trying to break into the UK, and they won resoundingly. Labour, on the other hand, are trying to kind of out reform in many cases, especially with their immigration stance, and they've been absolutely battered in England and in Scotland and in Wales. That's a result. You don't beat the far right by playing their game. You beat the far right by standing up to them and being proud about what you believe in and who you are as a party and as a people with your values, your morals, your principles. That's how you beat the far right.
Thank you, Jack. And Hugh, how do you think these very massive wins with Reform UK in England will reflect on the rest of the country?
Yeah, I think we need to dig down into the results as well, because there were people saying that the Greens have split the Labour vote, but I think it's the fact that we've got this multi-party system in place now, where in England the Greens, Lib Dems, Conservatives, Labour, and I was going to say UKIP then, and then Brexit, but it's this party that keeps evolving and changing its name based on whatever sort of issue that they're fighting for. I think this is their high watermark. Yeah, I think that this is their high watermark because, as Jack was saying, we were finding in Wales, sort of on the doorstep, Labour and particularly Starmer, hugely toxic. The people just genuinely don't like him. I think that he's a very poor prime minister. And the other thing is a lot of people don't like Farage. So there is, they're both polarizing individuals. But I think there's potential there. I think if Labour changed leader from Starmer to a hedgehog, they would improve their electoral prospects. And I think it's clear now, obviously that there are Labour backbenchers now. With talks of a stalking horse to try and force a leadership contest. But the issue then is, I don't think who would want to take over now when things are bad. But it's clear that Starmer will not be able to lead them into the next general election because he's done for. There's no coming back for it. So it's the timing and it's the individuals who are available to take over from it that are going to be key there. But I'm quite confident that if Labour do sort of change tack in their leadership in Westminster, then there is a potential there for them to fare better, and I think it will impact reform, because the other thing is going to be interesting. People, there's reformed representation in Holyrood, a bigger representation in the Senedd, but it's a matter of time until because what happens with, as they've shown in the county councils in England, the councillors don't last long. The infighting, factionalism. So I think once people get to see reform, at working at a national level in Wales and Scotland, that exposure hopefully will turn people against them.
I think if I can just build on Hugh's point, sorry,
No, of course.
I think we are heading in a direction just now where Labour could become extinct. they could become a non-entity. They could cease to exist as a party in the way that the Conservatives clearly are heading as well, because they've got no principles, they've got no values, and unless something dramatic is going to happen next week, which may or may not with Starmer going, they've got no leadership either. So who are they appealing to? Right, they're completely lost. I think are really in danger of just being extinct and not being an entity anymore. Look, they were absolutely battered in Wales. They were battered in Scotland and in England. I think we could be seeing the end of the Labour Party as we know it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Now, in the English Council elections, there was a further shift to the far right as Reform UK won seats from Labour and Conservative. Reform UK gained 1,451 seats, with Labour losing 1,496. Independent candidates also gained 34 seats. So, Jack, with the increase of Reform UK in the council elections, and Hugh, you mentioned this as well, what impact could a Reform majority council have on the people in its area?
Well, I think we've seen, or I've seen evidence that where they are in charge of councils in England, they've been an absolute disaster. They don't have a clue what they're doing. They promised that they wouldn't raise people's council taxes, and they did it immediately. So they're a party that basically exists on kind of divisive hatred, fear-mongering politics, and when you actually scratch beneath the surface, they have no substance or any policies. You saw that in their manifesto. Scotland, it was ridiculed and laughed at by financial experts. They don't have a clue what they're doing. So yeah, we'll see what pans out in England, but I think they are a party with no substance other than spreading hatred, and voters are going to find that out pretty quickly.
Thank you. And yes, and then also the prospect of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party with so many losses, but still some footholds in certain areas. How do you think they could still create an impact in their council areas? Oh, yes, Hugh.
Well,
Yeah.
sorry. As I said before, I think it goes back to the fact that the Tories are almost extinct. Sorry?
Oh, sorry, you froze there. Yep, but carry on. There was a bit of a delay there, but just keep going.
Sorry, I was just going to hit home the point again that the Conservative Party are virtually extinct. They are in terminal decline, and it's exactly where the Labour Party is heading as well. So, as I said in a previous answer, they've made their own bed, and now they're going to have to lie in it because they're on their knees. They are taking their orders from Farage. They're trying to move further to the right to appeal to this base rather than standing up for who they are and standing up for working class communities, and they're going to pay the price for that.
Thank you. And Hugh, how do you think a Reform majority council could have an impact on its people? And with so many Reform majority councils, how could that impact England on a national level?
Yeah, as Jack mentioned, I don't think there hasn't been a huge change from a council perspective, because obviously they were in the majority of these places. They were only electing a third of the councillors, so there was a less chance of change. But obviously, I think 14 councils of the 136, sort of Reform took control over. But as Jack was saying, we've seen in Kent and places like that, that they're a shambles, and not just sort of, they're just not serious people, because they're angry people who think that that everything can be solved by stopping the boats. It's as fundamental as that. It's a crazy idea that you can have this kind of politics and that it's going to be some sort of success. And as we've seen, in the last year since the council elections that were held a year ago, the number of Reform councillors who've gone or had to resign, become independent, whatever, because of a range of factors. Either they didn't realise it was actually hard work being a councillor, or bits of their history coming out of in most cases, racism. So yeah, I think in England, as I said earlier, I think this is their high water mark, because they're not going to be in a position where they're fighting against two utterly useless leaders in Starmer and Badenoch, because don't forget that Badenoch, even though the Tories trying to say, well, we didn't do as bad as as Labour, no, they didn't, and they fared slightly better in Wales than they were expected. But Badenoch is not the answer for the Conservatives, and both Labour and the Conservatives, they just don't know how to handle restore. I think Conservatives obviously want to try and out-restore reform. Sorry, I'm saying restore. That's the below one. Reform, out-reform. Whereas Labour, the strategy that they had, well, I don't think it was a strategy. God knows what Morgan McSweeney, what they were paying him to do, because it's clear, they're not losing votes to the right. Those people left the Labour Party during Brexit, UKIP, and that period. That's the majority who went, because you can see in England, the amount of people, went to the Greens, and in Wales, how Plaid Cymru won was by winning over former Labour voters and the one, progressive Labour voters who want, socialist values.
Thank you. And in the English elections, 34 seats were gained by independent candidates. So, Jack, what potential do you think these independent candidates could have in these councils?
Well, look, at the end of the day, all politics is local. So if they are going to be fighting for their constituents who are in their ward, their council wards in England, then that's going to be welcomed. That's going to be something that people are going to look fondly on. I've knocked thousands of doors during that campaign, and people just appreciate someone that's going to stand up for them and be a local champion and stand up for what they believe in and get around and speak to as many people as they can. So look, I don't know who these independent candidates are, but if they understand that all politics is local and they're going to stand up for their constituents in England, then I'm sure they'll be successful.
Thank you. And Hugh, what do you think of these independent candidates?
Yeah, because I think the most interesting one was the Tower Hamlets with Aspire winning, taking over, as mayor of Tower Hamlets, but also the fact that they took over the council as well, with 33 councillors up 9, and the Greens increasing their representation at the expense of, entirely of the Labour Party. So I think Tower Hamlets shows, okay, so inner city London has always been traditionally Labour, but it shows you that it's the the values of the left, if you want to call it that, is what people want to vote for, and it's what they wanted Labour to be under Starmer. It's not one thing or the other. It's an absolute mess. Nobody knows what they stand for, apart from sort of Starmer banging on about I'm here to serving working people, and it's just failed badly.
Thank you. And moving on to the Welsh elections. On Thursday, voters in Wales voted in their representatives for the Welsh Senate. The Labour Party lost 35 seats, with 9 remaining, whereas Plaid Cymru and Reform UK gained 20 and 34 seats respectively. Plaid Cymru are 6 seats short of a majority, and the leader of Welsh Labour, Eluned Morgan, lost her seat. So, Hugh, with and we have some footage from the results.
So this is a game-changing results. Honestly, today was the first day when you start to see the number of people who've turned out with the expectation that Wales changes today. It puts a real onus on what we've got to do over the next 4 years. I've never felt so proud of the team who helped us get there. And if you look at it now, you've got a UK that's changing. You've got Scotland with a pro-independence majority. You've got a Plaid Cymru government to be set up in Wales. So this is what happens now. This is where we start to move forward. The key thing, though, is that the people of Wales want to see better public services. There's a job of work to do. So, today's a day for celebration and Monday's a day for work.
Yes. So, Hugh, Plaid Cymru is the largest party in the Senate at the moment, but it is slightly short of a majority. So, if there is to be a coalition formed, who do you see them forming a coalition with?
They're not going to form a coalition. Just to say, that was Mark Hooper as well, who has been a guest on Broadcasting Scotland in the past, and he was elected as top of the list in Penabont Bro Morgannwg, which combines the Bridgend and the Vale of Glamorgan constituencies. So yeah, I think Plaid have been open all along. They're not going to go into coalition. They're going to operate as a minority government. And making a case for their policies and for their budget, which is because the whole point of proportional representation is to sort of create this collaborative politics. Labour clearly are toxic, and people wouldn't look favourably, on sort of doing sort of formal deals with Labour because. Obviously they didn't want Labour. They rejected Labour. They wanted a different voice. The Greens didn't do as well as predicted. They only gained 2 seats. But those Green Senate members, their politics are closely aligned with Plaid, and the Greens. They're not a separate party as they are in Scotland. It's the Green Party of England and Wales, but they support independence as well. So you've got an extra 2 there who are that. But I genuinely believe that there's a real chance of by Christmas of Plaid Cymru having a majority in the Senedd. We've seen it in the past with when UKIP were in, people sort of falling out, leaving, and having to sort of stand down. And this time, it wouldn't surprise me if 3 of the 30 odd Reform Senedd members, something happens, and in Wales they've changed the rules now, so they can stand as independents, but they can't go to another party. And if they do want to try and sort of go to another party, then a by-election will be called. And I think the chances of having an election where people realise that Labour are a spent force, the Tories, a single-digit membership out of 96, that Plaid could make the case. Then is this what you genuinely wanted? And Plaid could motivate people to vote in a block as they did in Caerphilly, in a head-to-head by-election before Christmas, and win that. So. They'll work as a minority. They'll make the case for things, and it's up to the other parties then to show some maturity and leadership, and say whether they're going to support something. Because obviously, if Plaid want to improve the NHS, it's not going to look good on the other parties if they're saying, no, we don't want to see the NHS improve. So yeah, it's going to be interesting times, but it's going to be a challenge as well, because obviously Plaid have gone from being a small party. We've had sort of 10, 12 members in the past. Obviously, the Senedd has expanded from 60 to 96 members. So Plaid have gone from being a small party to being to being a big party, and with that comes challenges. And I'm sure, as the SNP found when they made the breakthrough 20 odd years ago, going from a smaller party in opposition to being a big party, running the show and having to sort of take those decisions and having the responsibility for it, it is going to be a challenge, because there's lots of people in there who haven't got experience of being in the Senedd before, which for me is a good thing. But yeah, and as Mark said at the end of his video, we can celebrate, a victory for Plaid Cymru. But Monday, the hard work starts, because they've got a 100-day first 100-day program, and they've outlined what they're going to do, and now they have to deliver.
Thank you. And so, Jack, you mentioned that there was a change in the Welsh electoral system going from 60 to 96 areas, I believe. So do you believe the Scottish Holyrood Parliament could make similar changes, or just any changes in its voting system?
If I could just touch on briefly, how good was that clip that you showed? That was so good. The energy that was there at that rally looked amazing. I saw Reen, the leader of Plaid, his speech at the same rally, and it brought a tear to my eye. I know him well. I know his team around him well, and as Hugh said, they're a way to grow. They were a small party, and now they're going to be in charge of running the country. But they're clever cookies. They know what they're doing. They're going to be absolutely fine. The victory there in Wales, the victory in Scotland are, frankly, another two nails in the coffin of the United Kingdom, which is in terminal decline. It's on the way out. I think it's a victory that shows that the tired old politics of the past, folk aren't happy with it. They're not going to stand for it anymore. And who'd have thought that the answers to the challenges that we face in the middle of a cost of living crisis actually lie within the people who live and work there, not within the halls of Westminster Palace. That's a crazy idea. In terms of reform at Holyrood, I think we're aware of the threat of Reform UK, Nigel Farage's party, who said that they want to cut the numbers of MSPs. They want to cut funding for Scotland. Scotland's national parliament should be protected at all costs, and that's obviously what the SNP will do. And as many representatives as we can have there standing up and fighting for their constituents in the best interests of Scotland, the better. But we need to be very aware and alert to the fact that Reform UK want to take us backwards. They want to end devolution as we know it. Scotland the SNP wants Scotland to thrive, and we want to progress beyond devolution, and we should be an independent country.
Thank you. And Hugh, you mentioned that Plaid Cymru has made an outline of its first 100 days in the Senedd. So how could you summarise this manifesto, I suppose, of the first 100 days?
Yeah, I think obviously you have to remember in Wales that there's less control over matters that compared with Holyrood. It's obviously the main area of responsibility are education and the health service and transport. But the main things they're going to be looking at is, in the last few years, the Welsh Labour government have spent £7 billion on alleviating poverty in Wales. And during that time, and after spending $7 billion, poverty has increased. So there has to be, sort of a because obviously there's no extra money, but we need to look at how the money that is spent more effectively. It's not a case of efficiencies, but you have to look at how do we alleviate poverty. The SNP have shown the way of how you can practically do that. So things like support for parents around childcare, that was one of the big priorities. So they're going to be looking at that and piloting it. Because remember, the Plaid haven't been able to sort of look under the bonnet properly to see, from a financial point of view, what is being spent here, there, and everywhere. But the first 100 days, a lot of it is reviewing, and getting an understanding in order to sort of come up with a plan. But obviously, the big thing from a health point of view is building these independent health hubs, so smaller hubs that can carry out, sort of day-to-day routine operations, like sort of hip, knee replacements, the bread and butter surgery that is, clogging up the health, the waiting list. The other thing that Plaid are looking at is integrating health and social care, because that's a big issue in Wales. One of the big issues is people waiting, to get into A&E and getting out of A&E because of the shortage of beds, because people cannot be sent home into the community due to the issues with social care. So, there's that first 100 days, but that the priority is health and education, and of making, spending the money that is available more effectively.
Thank you. And moving on to Scotland. Scottish voters also flocked to the polls on the 7th of May to vote in... Oh, sorry, yes, we have some footage from the election as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me in Edinburgh today. Regular, fair and free elections are something we all take for granted in this country, but we shouldn't. So before I go any further, I'd like to thank all those involved in making our elections happen all across Scotland in the last few days, and I also want to thank everybody who came out to vote in the election. The people have now spoken. The SNP has won the Scottish Parliament election, and we have won it emphatically. Yeah. It is clear that the make-up of this Parliament will be considerably different to those which preceded it. Nigel Farage's Reform Party have won seats in the Scottish Parliament. While I obviously recognise that some people in Scotland support reform, there is no doubt that many of our fellow Scots will today be feeling very unsettled by the prospect of a party taking seats in the Scottish Parliament which holds such hostility to minority groups in our country. So I want to reaffirm today the commitment I made when I took office. I will build a Scotland where everyone feels seen, where everyone feels at home, and where everyone is able to contribute to Scotland's story. My immediate commitment, as I promised during the campaign, is to ensure that Nigel Farage and Reform are locked out of governance in Scotland. I will be engaging in talks with other opposition parties in the coming days to ensure that this happens and that there can be a stable and inclusive approach to governance after the election. Although the Scottish National Party commands a significant lead in the Scottish Parliament, we do not hold a majority. There will need to be cross-party cooperation to improve the lives of people in Scotland. When it comes to that task, I am probably more experienced than any other political leader in the United Kingdom in accomplishing what is necessary in that respect. I believe that I can command a majority in Parliament for everything in the SNP manifesto, the manifesto which, after all, won the support of the people of Scotland. And of course, a key part of my discussions with other parties will be to listen to their own priorities for this new Parliament. This now brings me to the question of the referendum. There has now been a pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament for 4 elections in a row. This mandate has been ignored by successive Westminster Prime Ministers, Labour and Tory, year after year after year. I had hoped in this election we could break the logjam by securing the only thing that has previously actually secured a vote, which was an SNP majority. Despite all the attempts to stop us, for the 4th election in a row, there is a pro-independence mandate in the new Scottish Parliament. Elliot Johnson from Broadcasting Scotland. Elliot.
Given the amount of support we saw Reform get in this election through the vote share, will that affect the way you approach this Parliament at all?
It will, in the sense that, I think, as I've said before, I think there are 2 components of support for reform in this country. One is people who fundamentally hold views that I find repugnant. And then there's other people who are angry and frustrated. And I'm pessimistic that I can persuade people who hold repugnant views that I can persuade them, but I suppose you should never say never. But on the question of people being angry, that's the importance of my commitments, to deliver for people, to improve their lives. And the irony of the election campaign, or what we heard during the election campaign, is that so many people are angry about their standard of living, and so much of their standard of living is affected by Brexit and the colossal impact on national wealth and well-being, and the authors of that, of course, were Reform. So we'll point that out to people, and we'll actively confront those politics to ensure that we can make progress in that respect.
Thank you. And so the SNP won more seats than any of the pro-union parties combined. Reform UK and the Scottish Greens saw unprecedented wins. as well, with the Greens gaining their first constituency seats in Edinburgh Central and Glasgow Southside. So, Jack, do you see an SNP and Green coalition in this Parliament, or a minority government, or maybe a coalition with another party?
So that clip there from John Swinney was just superb. What a leader! You know, he's just led us to an emphatic landslide victory. It's a huge endorsement in his strong leadership. He was the only candidate standing up to be First Minister of Scotland. He was the only candidate that had a positive case to put forward, telling the people of Scotland what we wanted to do. Everyone else talked about why they were going to stop us and why it shouldn't be the SNP. John Swinney stood on the SNP's record and stood on a really strong manifesto, and now he's going to deliver it. I expect from his comments yesterday that it will be delivered in a minority government, but we will be working cooperatively, as is John Swinneyism, with others. But important, all the other parties will be called into St Andrew's House, the heart of the Scottish government, next week for talks about how we move forward, apart from reform. As I said in a previous answer, you don't beat the far right. You don't beat Nigel Farage by playing his game. They need locked out. That was the promise. An SNP win would help us move forward with independence, to unlock the opportunities of independence, but importantly also lock out Nigel Farage. So I expect the SNP will run a minority government. That's something that I will welcome, and as an MSP, I know that it's going to fall on me to work with the other parties. But look, we need to be well aware and awake to the fact that Reform are going to be probably a very toxic party in this Parliament. I think it's right that we're taking steps to lock them out already in the first week in government.
Thank you. And Hugh, how do you think Reform MSPs could impact decision-making in Parliament? While they do not have as many seats as some other parties, they still have about 17, and that is a considerable size.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of people don't understand is, you know, the scrutinising that goes on, with the committees. So you know, it's not just a case of representing your constituent, but it's also to hold the government of the time to account. And they're just not serious people. And are they able to do that work? It's just depressing, and hopefully, they will get exposed now for being exactly what John Swinney said. Half of them are, sort of, their support is angry, and half of them, support their, some of their abhorrent policies and views. So yeah, I think it's a good job. Obviously, in Scotland, you've got a greater number of MSPs because of the size of the population of the country. So they are sort of more diluted in Holyrood, whereas in Wales, we expanded the Senedd from 60 to 96 in order to have improved scrutiny. Or 34 of those extra 36 seats are now being taken by Reform, who are likely to, not do that scrutiny to the level and to the standard that's required. But I agree completely. They should, Reform should be locked out of any sort of decision making. People say, "Oh, you've got to work together with parties." Well, no, you don't. You know what I mean? There's a group of people in Wales and in Scotland who have voted for progressive parties, and those progressive parties should work together, in a grown-up way. Unfortunately, it does seem that Labour has a problem sort of working with other parties, and we've seen, from comments from sort of Starmer and also Wes Streeting, sort of telling people of Scotland that you can't have independence. We're telling you, and it's just awful. But yeah, no, we'll see what happens. It was interesting. Rhys Iorwerth was talking this morning on Radio Wales. He's spoken to the leaders of all the other parties, but Dan Thomas, who's the leader of Reform, didn't want to speak to him. or wasn't available. So that tells you everything.
Thank you. And so, Jack, with the SNP being the party with the most seats, not majority, but party with the most seats, how far away do you think another bid for an independence referendum is?
Well, yeah, we didn't get a majority, but getting a majority in this system, the system is literally designed to prevent a majority. It was a hugely ambitious ask that John Swinney set, but I think that's evidence of how unashamedly ambitious that he is for Scotland. That he sets these high goals. We've got the largest ever pro-independence majority. The SNP vastly outperformed the 33% odd that Labour got at the 2024 election. We have absolutely received another mandate to push forward independence. And John Swinney reaffirmed yesterday that in the first week of his government, once he's voted in as First Minister, that he'll be on the phone to Keir Starmer demanding that the people of Scotland are allowed to have a democratic say, allowed to be in charge of their own future. Who knows if Keir Starmer is still going to be in charge this time next week? But look, independence is inevitable. It's coming. The UK is in terminal decline. And one way or another, the people of Scotland will have a say and they will vote for independence.
Thank you. And Hugh, going back to our previous discussion on coalitions, do you see the SNP forming a coalition with other parties or remaining a minority government? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, like I say, as Jack said, they won't, and as Plaid Cymru have said, they won't. And it's a good thing, because I think people do feel not let down by coalitions, but it's the sense then that if you do go into coalitions, one of the things that Plaid Cymru was accused of, because Plaid they have been in coalition and they've also had agreements with other parties. And it's the one thing that lots of people say, well, we don't want Labour, we want something different. So, Plaid Cymru has to be different. And, they've got enough, of a mandate with the seats that they have to do that. There's two Greens, there's one Lib Dem. The Lib Dems had a very interesting tactic. They said their red line was supporting any discussions around independence. So having one Lib Dem in the Senedd who has basically ruled out working with Plaid Cymru is an interesting tactical move. But no, yeah, I think because I think it is, as Jack was saying, it is a big difference now. We've got First Ministers in Scotland, Wales, and well, hopefully in Wales. It hasn't been decided yet. It's all in Scotland and in Northern Ireland, who are all pro-independence. You've got, a Westminster government who want to keep us against our will within a union that benefits them and nobody else. We forget, 84% of the population in the UK live in England. Not necessarily they're all English, but they live in England. So that union, it's not a union of equals. It's nowhere near that. So I think having, Plaid Cymru and John Swinney and Llŷn ap Iorwerth on the phone to Starmer on a regular basis can only be good for Wales and Scotland.
Thank you. And Jack, I wanted to ask, what merits are, if any, in a minority government in Holyrood?
Well, the SNP ran a minority government in 2007, in 2016, and recently after the Butte House Agreement ended, a minority government there. I think it suits John Swinney's leadership style down to a T, because he wants to cooperate, he wants to work with other parties other than the far right Reform Party. I think it's going to mean that the Parliament's more constructive, hopefully. As I say, Reform, I think, are going to be this toxic entity in the chamber, but otherwise you're going to have to work with other parties, you're going to have to take them in, you're going to have discussions over budgets, over bills. I think that could only be a good thing. There's a lot of new candidates coming in. I think there's a lot of kind of young energy going to be in the Scottish Parliament. And I think if we can work together, putting differences aside, even though we've got the largest ever pro-independence majority in the Parliament, but working together with the best interests of your local folk in mind, I think that's going to be a good thing for the Parliament. I think that's genuinely what John Swinney wants to do. I think it's going to suit his leadership style down to a T.
Thank you very much. Well, that is it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We can only exist with your support. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you, and thank you again to our guests Jack Middleton and Hugh Marshall.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me in Edinburgh today. Regular, fair and free elections are something we all take for granted in this country, but we shouldn't. So before I go any further, I'd like to thank all those involved in making our elections happen all across Scotland in the last few days, and I also want to thank everybody who came out to vote in the election. The people have now spoken. The SNP has won the Scottish Parliament election, and we have won it emphatically. The people have voted for a government that is on Scotland's side, and they have voted by a landslide for a pro-independence government. The significance of this achievement for the SNP cannot be understated. Nor was it by any means a certainty. When I became SNP leader 2 years ago, opinion polls suggested the SNP would win around 35 seats at this election. We were on course to lose this election, but we have just won, and the margin between the SNP and the two now joint second largest parties is bigger than at any time in the history of the Scottish Parliament. We've also won a higher share of the vote than Keir Starmer did across the United Kingdom in 2024, an election widely described as a landslide. The result is down to three things. Firstly, it is down to the incredible efforts of SNP candidates and activists all across Scotland. We never take people's support for granted, and we have all worked very, very hard for this result. In the last few weeks, our ground campaign has been nothing short of astonishing. But this victory was not built in the last few weeks. It was built on extensive doorstep engagement over months and indeed years with the people that we serve. We listen carefully to people's concerns and aspirations, and we have built our programme for government around those concerns. That government record is the second factor which I attribute to our victory. People can see the improvements that we are delivering to the NHS and to other public services, and they can feel the action we are taking on the cost of living. Put simply, in the SNP, they see that they have a government that is on their side, a government on Scotland's side. And that is the third factor in our victory. Over the last 2 years, in uncertain times, I, as First Minister, have offered everything I have to deliver experienced leadership to our country. On Thursday, the people have asked me to continue to do so, and I intend to do exactly what the people have asked of me. It is clear that the makeup of this Parliament will be considerably different to those which preceded it. Nigel Farage's Reform Party have won seats in the Scottish Parliament. While I obviously recognise that some people in Scotland support reform, there is no doubt that many of our fellow Scots will today be feeling very unsettled by the prospect of a party taking seats in the Scottish Parliament which holds such hostility to minority groups in our country. So I want to reaffirm today the commitment I made when I took office. I will build a Scotland where everyone feels seen, where everyone feels at home, and where everyone is able to contribute to Scotland's story. I believe that the vast majority of MSPs in this new Parliament share that aspiration. So my immediate commitment, as I promised during the campaign, is to ensure that Nigel Farage and Reform are locked out of governance in Scotland. I will be engaging in talks with other opposition parties in the coming days to ensure that this happens and that there can be a stable and inclusive approach to governance after the election. Although the Scottish National Party commands a significant lead in the Scottish Parliament, we do not hold a majority. There will need to be cross-party cooperation to improve the lives of people in Scotland. When it comes to that task, I am probably more experienced than any other political leader in the United Kingdom in accomplishing what is necessary in that respect. I believe that I can command a majority in Parliament for everything in the SNP manifesto, the manifesto which, after all, won the support of the people of Scotland. And of course, a key part of my discussions with other parties will be to listen to their own priorities for this new Parliament. This now brings me to the question of the referendum. There has now been a pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament for 4 elections in a row. This mandate has been ignored by successive Westminster Prime Ministers, Labour and Tory, year after year after year. I had hoped in this election we could break the logjam by securing the only thing that has previously actually secured a vote, which was an SNP majority. Although we've come very close to achieving that SNP majority has not been accomplished. But that does not change the underlying fact that despite all the attempts to stop us, for the 4th election in a row, there is a pro-independence mandate in the new Scottish Parliament. Indeed, there are now more pro-independence MSPs than at any time in the history of the Scottish Parliament. The way forward on this must be made in Scotland. The results across the UK made clear why the need for independence is so urgent. Nigel Farage is now galloping towards Downing Street, and the prospect of a reform-led government is more likely than not. The UK may well soon have a Prime Minister who is openly hostile to minority groups, who has called for the privatisation of the NHS and the abolition of the Scottish Parliament. It is vital that we unite in Scotland to ensure our Parliament is fully Farage-proofed. That means having the power before 2029 to decide our own constitutional future without Farage being able to block us. The alternative future for Scotland is as an independent country with the greater security and prosperity offered by EU membership and making our vast energy wealth work for the people of Scotland. I will have more to say on the way forward on independence in the coming days and weeks, but let me make one final reflection in my comments today. After Thursday's elections, there are now set to be First Ministers in Wales, Northern Ireland and in Scotland, all committed to fundamental constitutional change. If Westminster has not yet grasped the significance of this moment, then it certainly will come to appreciate it in the weeks and the months ahead, believe me, because the direction of travel is clear. What people in London like to refer to, rather patronisingly, as the Celtic fringe, is very much about to become centre stage. Before I take their questions, let me finish by stressing a point that I made to the people of Scotland during the election campaign. Over the last few weeks, all candidates have heard the frustration of members of the public at the cost of living and the anxiety about the uncertain world in which we live. Those lucky enough to be elected to Parliament now have a duty to address that frustration and that anxiety. Election campaigns, by their very nature, are divisive. The whole purpose is that different points of view can be aired and debated. But now that the people have spoken, as far as I'm concerned, we all have to move forward together. I give you my commitment that for as long as I am First Minister, I will work every day to improve the lives of the people of Scotland and to make Scotland the better country that we all know that Scotland can be. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll move on to take questions from journalists. We'll go through the broadcasters first and then the print media, and I've got a lot to get through, so if we can keep it quite tight, please. So, first of all, Conor Gillis.
Mr Swinney, the US President has congratulated you on this win. Has he called you? And second of all, you didn't get that majority that you wanted. Surely that means that immediate day one talks that you had suggested before for independence are now off the table.
President Trump has not phoned me, but if he does, I'll be sure to let you know in my usual transparent way. On the question of independence, obviously I set out a means of breaking the logjam because Scottish politics has been stuck because of the intransigence of the UK government, but not because of the views of the people of Scotland, because the people of Scotland emphatically want to have a choice about their future. So I want to make it abundantly clear that to somebody who has believed in independence all his adult life and who wants to make sure Scottish independence happens, that the people of Scotland must be able to have a choice about their future, and I intend to make sure that happens. Can I come to James Cook from BBC? James.
Thanks very much indeed. How concerned are you about the prospect of Nigel Farage becoming Prime Minister? Do you think that is a realistic possibility, but also, do you think that would actually help you and energise the independence cause?
I don't think anybody could have been clearer. Indeed, I think it's actually part of why the SNP has done so well in the election, is that I have have stood right up to Nigel Farage and his politics, and we've reinforced that around the country. And we haven't in any way, shape or form dabbled with the politics of Farage, which other people have dabbled with, and I think they've dabbled with it to their cost. So I will be absolutely robust in setting out my hostility to reform and to Farage, but I also have to be open with the public about what I think is coming our way. And what is coming our way is the likelihood of Farage being the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And you only need to look at some of the people who are demanding the Prime Minister moves over right away, because they can see that coming as well. My view is not a view just of my own. So I think the very real threat exists of that, and that's why I think people in Scotland have got to be alert to that, and why we need to have the protection of being an independent country from being affected and influenced by the election of a Farage government, which I think would be absolutely catastrophic for everybody in the United Kingdom. Right, Colm Mackay.
You made some big promises in your manifesto about tackling the cost of living. When can people expect to see movement on capping supermarket prices, £2 cap on bus fares, for example?
On the issues in relation to the affordable prices cap, we'll bring forward legislation at the very earliest opportunity. We'll also engage in dialogue with the supermarkets and primary producers about the practicalities of taking that forward, because I want to provide that relief and that assistance to people at the earliest opportunity. The £2 bus fare cap is a proposal that is now operational in the Highlands and Islands, so we know exactly how that operates and what is required to make it happen. So we'll be pursuing that as part of the immediate priorities. Those of you would all have seen during the election campaign the 100 days document that I published. That will be, I would simply say to you that that's a reference point for what you can expect the government to be doing, and I'll be in St Andrew's House on Monday morning, starting the process of that work to take that forward and to make sure that we use every available moment that is there for us in the aftermath of the election to ensure that we pursue those priorities.
So both within 100 days?
Pardon?
Both of those within 100 days?
Well, I said that we'll take forward the legislation and we'll advance on the bus fares cap, but we know exactly how to take forward these steps, and they'll be part of our 100 days programme to take forward that action. Glenn Campbell, I see you've got the microphone already, so we may as well have you.
Thank you. Is this a continuity SNP government, or are we going to notice something very different, given that you have won your own mandate? And how can you be a unifying First Minister, a collaborative First Minister, whilst at the same time pushing for independence?
What a fascinating question, a really interesting question. I think it was on the BBC last night, I was asked if this would be the start of Swinneyism, which is quite an interesting and exciting thought. And it will need quite a long time to make sure it comes into to effect in people's lives. So just to reassure you on that point, Glenn. What I set out in the manifesto was a very deliberate attempt to set out the basis of the government I intend to lead, which will be a government that recognises the importance of growing the economy, delivering substantial gains in terms of economic prosperity to enable us to support the just and fair society that we all believe in. And that will be the aspiration right at the heart of what I do and what I take forward. So, yes, there will be different characteristics and approaches to what you've experienced in the SNP before, because in trying to achieve those objectives, I'm going to have to do things differently to make sure we're successful. And again, that's going to be top of my agenda when I go to St Andrew's House on Monday morning to start that process of work, and I've already flagged that to the civil service about my priorities. And in terms of the question of unity, I think part of why the SNP has been successful, so successful in the election campaign, is I have managed to rebuild a much bigger cross-section of support around the SNP in the course of the last couple of years as First Minister, and I intend to keep on doing that and building that agreement. And I don't actually view independence as an issue that stops people coming to work with me or supporting the SNP, because I will make my arguments on the Constitution. Other people can make their arguments. We live in a democracy, but surely there's space for all of us to think for a moment about what we can all achieve together by trying to improve the lives of people in Scotland. Indeed, I think if I reflect on some of where some of my opponents find themselves after the election, a constant stream of negativity about Scotland has got my opponents precisely nowhere. And I think, if I could just suggest a moment of reflection to my opponents, possibly contributing more to the common good might actually deliver some better returns for them. But that's my free political advice today. Right, can I come to Craig Meehan from PA? Craig.
Good afternoon. Do you accept that running your entire campaign on the basis that an SNP majority would be a mandate for independence has undermined your argument now that a majority of pro-independence SNPs is a mandate? And then just secondly, given that, as you said, we had a pro-independence majority in 2016 and 2021, and you couldn't get any closer then, do you need to be honest with Scots that you're no closer to a referendum now?
I think the question is about what's the attitude of the UK government and what's the sustainability of their position. Because in all my political lifetime, it's been accepted that this is a voluntary union in which people are entitled in Scotland to decide if they wish to remain within it. And now we're hearing, and that was provided for in 2014, we're now hearing a rhetoric which is suggesting, well, actually there are almost no circumstances in which that can be happened. That's not a sustainable line of argument. So what I intend to do is take time and care to work with all interested parties who are interested in securing Scottish independence to make sure that that choice can be put to the people of Scotland at the earliest possible opportunity. Can I now come to Liam Evans from BBC Wales? Liam.
Thank you. Can I get your thoughts on the First Minister of Wales, Eluned Morgan, losing her seat in the past day or so, and how you'll find working with a Plaid Cymru government in the future? And also, you mentioned there the 3 devolved nations could now have parties that want to break up the UK. Do you find yourself working actively with them over the next few years to do that? Thank you.
First of all, on Eluned Morgan, I've sent Eluned Morgan a message this morning to express my good wishes to her. I always had a very positive and fruitful relationship with Eluned Morgan, and I pay tribute to her leadership in Wales. But obviously, the Welsh Labour Party have had a very, very tough time, and I've sent her a message this morning, and I do wish her well. In relation to the outcome in Wales, I welcome and sincerely hope that there is a Plaid Cymru First Minister of Wales. We share aspirations on constitutional change. We have different approaches and priorities. I won't specify what Wales should do. I get on what Scotland needs and wants. It's up to the people of Wales to determine their own future. But what I can say is that I am looking forward very much to working with a Plaid Cymru First Minister in Wales and the First Minister of Northern Ireland. I was in touch with Michelle O'Neill yesterday, and we look forward to taking forward some joint collaboration to make sure the voices of our respective countries are heard loud and clear within the United Kingdom. Can I come to Gina Davidson now from Global? Gina.
Thank you very much. First Minister, you talked about Nigel Farage and holding him up as a kind of bogeyman. We've heard this from previous SNP leaders around Boris Johnson, in fact, and it didn't seem to drive up any more support for independence. What makes you think Nigel Farage will do that? And also, wouldn't you, in your heart of hearts, prefer him to be Prime Minister? Because he said it could be quite reasonable to have another independence referendum, unlike the Labour Party, which is obviously turning its face against it.
I think Nigel Farage would be catastrophic as a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and the consequences of it would be devastating for lots of very worried people in our society today. So there's no bit of me that has any empathy or agreement with that position. I think also in relation to Farage, I think the electoral pattern looks very much as if we're heading towards Farage being the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and I think that's an absolutely disastrous scenario for us to contemplate. Can I come to Lucia Walker from Channel 4?
Do you plan to seek a coalition with the Scottish Green Party, and how difficult do you think that might be this time round?
Obviously, I said in my comments, I'm going to engage in discussions with the leaders of all political parties. I won't be inviting Reform in to have those discussions. I will invite the other party leaders to come in to have those discussions individually, and I'll start that process next week. And we will discuss. We're obviously in an electoral arithmetic where the SNP is by a country mile the leading party, and we will form the next government. But I recognise the need to work collaboratively, as we've demonstrated on different issues. We've had good cooperation with members of the Green Party. We've had good cooperation with members of Liberals in some of our budget provisions. We've even had good cooperation with members of the Conservative and Labour parties on different policy issues. So it's not beyond the bounds of possible for politicians to work together. Indeed, I think when I was out and about during the election campaign, people often said to me, it'd be nice if we were able to work a little bit better together. So I shall give it my level best in the period ahead. Can I come to Susanna Blair of EFE News? Susanna.
First Minister, without an overall SNP majority, what is your next step on independence, and do you think is still very realistic for 2028?
I do, because I think the people of Scotland, once again, have elected a parliament that's got a majority that supports independence, and the democratic wishes of the people of Scotland should never be ignored or silenced. And I suggest, as I said in one of my other answers, the proposition I put to people was a means of breaking the logjam. We've got to find other means of breaking the logjam, and that's exactly what we'll try to do. Elliot Johnson from Broadcasting Scotland. Elliot.
Given the amount of support we saw Reform get in this election through the vote share, will that affect the way you approach this Parliament at all?
It will, in the sense that, I think, as I've said before, I think there are two components of support for reform in this country. One is people who fundamentally hold views that I find repugnant. And then there's other people who are angry and frustrated. And I'm pessimistic that I can persuade people who hold repugnant views that I can persuade them, but I suppose you should never say never. But on the question of people being angry, that's the importance of my commitments, to deliver for people, to improve their lives. And the irony of the election campaign, or what we heard during the election campaign, is that so many people are angry about their standard of living, and so much of their standard of living is affected by Brexit and the colossal impact on national wealth and well-being, and the authors of that, of course, were Reform. So we'll point that out to people, and we'll actively confront those politics to ensure that we can make progress in that respect. The last of the broadcasters is Justine Gerardi from AFP. Justine? No? Okay, fine. Okay, let's go on to print. Can I come first of all to Ali Clark from DC Thomson, please? Ali?
Morning, First Minister. You mentioned some of the divisions that Reform spoke to. We saw that in pretty ugly scenes in Blairgowrie last weekend. How worried are you about that, and how do you respond to that as First Minister? And just secondly, Keir Starmer has appointed Gordon Brown as a global envoy. Do you envisage that having a turnaround in Labour's fortunes?
On the first point, I'll start. The events that took place in my own constituency last Saturday have caused enormous distress within the community that I have the privilege to represent. Real distress. They've also had quite significant implications for my family as well, which has been deeply unsettling for us. I'm limited in what I can say because there have now been arrests made in relation to that incident, but let me just say how unsettled we have been as a family by what's happened over recent days, and that's shared by many of the people that I represent and who witnessed what happened in a very quiet and placid, welcoming, inclusive community that I have the privilege to represent. And but I probably should say limit to what I'm saying to that. On your other point, I suppose there's an old maxim: whenever you're in deep trouble, call for Gordon Brown. And I think it's beginning to decline as an effective tool and intervention. But I'm not altogether sure what the new role will involve. But I certainly don't think it will prolong Keir Starmer's stay in Downing Street for very long. Okay, Sev Crowell of The Guardian.
Good morning, First Minister. Thank you. Can I just go again to the question of Reform's arrival in the Scottish Parliament and the upsurge of nativism now in Scotland? There was a friend of mine who happens to be black who was walking home from voting in Portobello on Thursday with other women who happened to also be black, and they were racially abused by a man driving past in a car. Now, we've also spoken to the black and minority ethnic leaders of major civic institutions in Scotland the last few days. They're all very worried about what could now be happening in the Scottish Parliament and in Scottish society as a whole. Can you specify exactly what it is you're going to do to introduce greater unity, properly challenge racism and nativism in Scotland, and secondly, deal with what could potentially happen at the Scottish Parliament? You talk about locking out reform. Can you specify exactly how you're going to do that, please?
Okay. The first thing I want to say is that I'm terribly sorry about what your friends have experienced, because nobody should experience that in Scotland and in any set of circumstances. So I'm deeply troubled to hear that. What I mean about locking out reform is that, I, as First Minister, I have obligations under the Ministerial Code. If a reform member of the Scottish Parliament asks me a question at First Minister's question time, I have to answer it or I breach the Ministerial Code. So there are some things I have to do. But I'm not obliged, as I've just made clear to you, to invite Reform into St Andrew's House next week to have discussions with me about how we cooperate together. I'm not going to do that. Now, that will be viewed by some people as me being exclusive. It's me being deliberately firm about what I'm going to do. and setting out the boundaries of my cooperation. Now, I've been in Parliament, in the Scottish Parliament, since its foundation. And over all of that time, I think, with the exception of possibly one debate about, in the last parliamentary term, about bus passes for asylum seekers, on almost every other occasion, I haven't felt there was anything of a sense of the troubling rhetoric that you set out there in your question, Sev, from any political party. Labour, Liberal, Conservative, Green, SNP, Liberal, I'd say Liberals. So all of them. I've never ever sensed it. But I feel we're probably going to hear some things that none of us are going to like very much. And I'm sure some of my colleagues have heard some of these things on hustings over the course of the last few weeks. So what I've got to do is to give the leadership to make sure that gets no traction within Parliament or within the country. It puts a particular obligation to make sure that some of the campaigns, for example, that we mount, which we did towards the tail end of last year, the We Are Scotland campaign, which makes the virtue openly to the country of the multicultural identity of Scotland today, that we make a virtue of that to the public. And that's just one example. We have to make sure, and I'm confident about this, that Police Scotland, for example, are engaged very actively with a range of communities to make sure people are well supported and safe within our community. But in terms of the kind of wider question of, so that's what we'll do to tackle those sentiments. But in terms of making sure that there's no atmosphere of collaboration, just hold me to account for that, is what I would say. And you'll see that I will have nothing to do with the politics of reform. Right, can I come to Rebecca McCurdy now, please, from the Herald. Rebecca.
Thank you. In March, you said that you needed a majority to secure an independence referendum, and I emphasise the word need. You failed to get that majority, so has your credible plan for a referendum gone? And then secondly, if I could just quickly ask as well, can you give a concrete commitment that you'll be SNP leader by the end of this new parliamentary term?
On that last question, yes. I'll see out the whole term. On your first point, what I said was I was trying to do was to break the logjam, and the most reliable way I thought we could do that was by getting an SNP majority, because that's what broke the logjam in 2011. We didn't get an SNP majority, but there's an independent supporting majority in the Scottish Parliament. That can't be ignored. It just can't be ignored. It's not acceptable democratically to ignore that message from the people of Scotland. And what I've got to do is work with others to make sure that we advance this cause, because we cannot allow a situation to prevail where the United Kingdom government just says, well, we're just not engaging on this question, because that's anti-democratic and we shouldn't tolerate it in our society. Can I come to John Boothman from the Times, please? John.
John, you've spoken already about excluding reform from governance in Scotland. I mean, are the SNP going to try, for example, to stop reform taking up committee convenerships in the Parliament? You said to the Scotsman, I think the other day, that you would try and restrict them setting the agenda in Parliament. What kind of measures are you taking? And is there a danger you might turn them into victims and you're going to further alienate groups of people, including, you know, that group of people you spoke about yourself who supported reform during the election?
I don't think there's a danger of that, because I intend, in response to the question I gave to Elliot, that I intend to work to address, to the best of my ability, the issues that are concerning people in terms of, you know, the concerns about standard of living and the cost of living issues. So I'll do all that I can to address that. On your first point, you know, I don't run Parliament. So Parliament's got to sort out its rules. And obviously, you know, there's bureau processes, there's committees. Parliament decided just before we rose for the election that committee conveners would be elected by members of Parliament. So these issues will be in the hands of Parliament. And that, by the way, is a proposition with which I'm wholly supportive. I think it's a good proposal. So all of that will be for Parliament to manage, and I've been very clear that I've got ministerial code responsibilities, so will my ministers have those, to answer questions and to address constituency concerns, because members are elected by the public. But what we won't do is get into any kind of collaborative deal or arrangement with Reform. That's not going to happen, and I'll stick to that. Alistair Grant from the Scotsman. Alistair.
Hi there, thanks very much. Just on Reform again, I mean, you spoke during the election campaign that you attributed part of the rise to racism. I mean, given they came in second place in Scotland with quite a large proportion of the vote share, are you not quite concerned that so many people in Scotland are, under your characterisation, motivated by racism? And just as well on Reform's comments recently that they would set up immigration detention centres in areas where the Greens have won constituency MSPs. The Greens obviously have 2 constituency MSPs now. What would you do if Nigel Farage did come into power in Westminster and tried to implement that plan in Scotland?
Okay, on the first point, I think it's important that I re-emphasise that I think Reform voters are made up of 2 groups. There are people who have racist views and people who are angry. And I want to do my best, and they're angry about cost of living and all these issues, and I want to do my best to try to tackle that, to ensure that people feel better in their position in our society, and that will drive. So I said that at the heart of my programme would be the focus on the continued improvement of the NHS, the delivery of concrete measures on the cost of living, and giving Scotland a choice about her future. So these are the priorities of the government that I lead. So I hope to address some of that sentiment. I'd also point out that, you know, I saw much more optimistic presentations of what Reform were going to achieve in this election than they actually have achieved. So I think there's a bit of a sense of being underwhelmed by what Reform have achieved in this election already. On the question of immigration detention centres, you know, there are going to have to be arrangements for providing housing and for people who are asylum seekers and people who are involved in some of that decision making. The presentation of that proposal, however, so that's a necessity in our society, but the presentation of that proposal by Reform was designed to inflame and to divide. There's no other purpose to it. So I think that is illustrative of just the danger of what Reform represent, because the zeal with which the Reform spokespeople have argued that position is, to me, distasteful. So I certainly wouldn't be doing anything. I'd be doing everything in my power to make sure that whatever decisions have to be taken in that respect, if we take, for example, Cameron Barracks in Inverness, which, by the way, has not come to pass, despite all the talk about it, it's never come to pass. After the UK government eventually told us about some of the details, we've engaged with them about that. So there's a job of work that's got to be done there, but the presentation of that argument is done in a divisive and inflammatory fashion. Right, on my list here I've got both Tom Gordon and Michael Blackley from the Daily Mail, so I don't, are you both having a shot? I'm in a generous mode today, so I'll allow you. It's Michael first, right? Okay, Michael.
Hi, thanks very much. Always like double questions.
As long as they're not double whammies, Michael.
you said earlier to Connor that the people of Scotland have emphatically wanted a choice, but does the evidence not actually point otherwise? Because the pro-independence parties, the SNP and the Greens, got a significant minority of the votes in this election. And as much as you're criticising Nigel Farage, were you not raising a glass to him last night? Because the SNP vote collapsed, and you only won emphatically because Reform won votes off Labour and the Conservatives.
Okay, I think for the sake of everybody's experience of psephology, I think I'll maybe not engage too much in that last point. I'd simply point out that in the 2 years that I've been SNP leader, I've managed to increase the SNP vote by about 25%. as a consequence of our efforts. So I'm quite pleased with the progress that were made, and we did deliver an emphatic outcome in the election. And in relation to the question of, look, members of Parliament are elected to represent their communities, and Parliament's got a pro-independence majority, and I think that should be respected by the UK government. Tom, do you want a shot? Do you?
Well,
Tom Gordon.
On the same theme, you lost more than 400,000 constituency votes on 2021. You lost more than 400,000 list votes on 2021. SNP and Greens together have 42%. That is not an emphatic mandate for independence.
Well, there is a pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament. I'd also point out that some of your vote calculation depends on the number of people actually participating in the election as well. So we can tie ourselves up in knots discussing these particular points. But fundamentally, Parliament's got a pro-independence majority and more emphatic than it's ever had in the past. Right, Simon Johnson from the Telegraph. Simon.
Thank you. Could you give us some practical examples about how you could work with your Northern Irish and Welsh counterparts to achieve independence for your respective nations?
Certainly about influencing the priorities of the United Kingdom government, for example, in child poverty. So the UK government had to be dragged kicking and screaming to remove the two-child limit, and for me that was a massive priority that we could have that could have been lifted much earlier by a UK government helping us in our efforts in relation to child poverty. So there are issues of that nature. There are also other issues where, for example, the devolved governments don't always get treated with the access to particular decisions taken by the UK government through the Internal Market Act over the heads of devolved governments. Believe you me, that causes fury in devolved governments, all devolved governments, and perhaps us all working in concert with a shared agenda might get us somewhere on that point. Well, what I said was to Liam from BBC Wales is that we've all got our constitutional journeys to take forward, and I'm not going to prescribe anyone else's. I'll just try to make sure that there's an understanding in Whitehall that it's not business as usual, and I think that would be well understood. And there's lots of people I could give you a list of names who need to think it's not business as usual, but I'll restrain myself at this moment. Right, David Walker from the Express. David.
Hi, First Minister. Have you moved the goalposts on getting a referendum? You said repeatedly that you'd only ask for one if you got a mandate of a majority SNP government. Have you moved the goalposts on that? And what do you say to the most Scots who don't want a referendum, but you're now in charge of them as well?
I said I'll always serve people in Scotland to the best of my ability across the political spectrum, and that's what I'll do. And I think it's pretty good evidence that I've been doing that for the last couple of years as First Minister. In relation to the independence question, the point I was making, and the heart of my argument, was the way that I thought we could break the impasse, the logjam, was to get an SNP majority. We've not got an SNP majority, but there is an aspiration in Scotland to decide on our own future as represented by the election of the largest number of pro-independence members to the Scottish Parliament, and I think that should be respected, and that's the point I'm advancing today. Right, can I come to Abby Garton-Crosby from the National? Abby?
Hello, I'm behind you. Yeah, so obviously you said there that you want to get an understanding across to Whitehall that it's not business as usual, and I was wondering if you could give a bit more insight on how you're going to do that along with the other devolved nations, and do you think that the significance of every devolved nation and government now wanting to leave the Union has really been accepted by Westminster, and have you spoken to Keir Starmer about that yet?
Yeah, I've not spoken to Keir Starmer. We'll wait and see what comes. In relation to the work amongst the three devolved governments, I think it's very clear from the engagement that we've had over the course of the last period, the interest in working together. Michelle O'Neill, the First Minister of Northern Ireland, made very clear last night her enthusiasm to work collaboratively, and I've been again in contact with Michelle on that question, so we'll advance that. Whether there's a cultural appreciation in Whitehall of just how much the United Kingdom has changed because there is a nationalist administration in Scotland, I hope there'll be one in Wales, as a consequence of the post-election arrangement, and there is a nationalist First Minister in Northern Ireland. The UK is in a fundamentally different position, and the bit that's got to catch up with us is Whitehall, and the sooner they do it, the better, and we'll be pressing for that to be the case. Right, can I have Phyllis Stephen from the Edinburgh Report? Phyllis?
Thank you very much. I'll ask you the same question I asked Alex Cole-Hamilton this morning. Do you think Malcolm Offord will still be an MSP in 5 years' time? Then I'll tell you what Alex said.
Well, I suppose I better say that I'm really interested to hear Alex Cole-Hamilton's answer on that question. I think there must be some doubt about it. I never thought he looked that particularly interested in the election campaign, to be honest. So I'm sure I don't want to be in any way disparaging to the Delegated Powers Committee that Stuart McMillan was chairing in the last Parliament, but once he's had 5 years on there, he might... 5 minutes on there might be enough for him, but sorry, Stuart. Simeon Kerr. Simeon.
Thanks, First Minister. I was just wondering if you could lay out, you've talked about how the economy is going to be at the heart of your next administration. Could you lay out some of the policies that you hope to persuade a sceptical business community that that is the case?
I hear sort of comments about, business community attitudes. I often read Ian McConnell in the Herald, and Ian McConnell has got a very alternative take on the attitudes of the business community, and I think it represents some of what I hear from many in the business community about the desire of the government to, or the evidence of the government acting strongly to support and to nurture the issues of interest to the business community. I obviously spend a lot of my time trying to attract investment into Scotland. I think the investment process is so significant. The changes that we made, for example, in the housing bill that Shirley Ann Somerville and Mary McCallan took through the last Parliament have helped us enormously in creating investment opportunities in the housing sector. We've, just before the election in the south of Scotland, I announced thousands of jobs that are a product of good investment engagement within Scotland. So there's lots that focus on investment will be critical. Focus on collaboration with our university sector to make sure that the benefits of their research and development can be felt within the economy will be central too. And also some of the issues around about planning and the necessity to get the planning system moving faster. I heard, courtesy of the hustings organised by DC Thompson just the Friday before the election, of the challenges of some of our local authority engagement on planning. That needs to be tackled and challenged, and we'll be doing that. And then also some of the issues in relation to business rates. We need to look afresh at the business rates issues given the challenges that have been felt just now, and we will do that. So that's just a collection of some of the issues that we will do. The final question is Mark McLaughlin from The Sun. Mark.
Good afternoon, First Minister. During the campaign, you said on the first sitting day of a new government, you'll bring forward a vote to approve the development of a Section 30 order for Scotland to hold the power of an independence referendum. Do you still intend to stick to that? You've said you're going to bring the unionist parties into St Andrew's House for talks. If they insist it's a red line, you take that off the table. Will you take it off the table?
I certainly intend to carry on with my plans, yes, and I'll talk to the leaders of all political parties, with the exception of Reform, about how we might collaborate to improve the lives of people in Scotland. And I think having a referendum on independence and becoming an independent country would be a significant factor in improving the lives of people in Scotland. That's why it's so important that we pursue that issue. Okay, right, thank you very much, everybody. My colleagues and I are meeting for our first session of our new parliamentary group, which I look forward to enormously. Can I thank members of the media for being here today, and I look forward to our further engagement in the period ahead. Thank you very much.